Hello, Gino here, and you are listening to Otherworld Connections. We live in a critical time where now, more than ever, angels and fairies, hidden forces, are bursting at the seams of the veil to work with us. They want to see us change in order to save the world and live in service to others. So join me on a journey to empowerment and enlightenment with an angelic angle and a fairy focus, looking into ways to improve our current situation, morality, archetypes, solutions for self-healing, and spiritual sciences in light of theosophy and other occult traditions.
Hello, welcome back to Otherworld Connections. In today's show, we are continuing our read-through of Bernard Rogers' 2013 book, The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose. And we're up to chapter 2. There's a bit more to the show than that, but this book is right on the button and very timely of where we're at on the 30th or so edition of Otherworld Connections. We are looking at chapter 2, the initiation, and the first line is, in the etymological, true sense of the word, initiation means to put on a path. And when we're born, we are put on a path. And the whole point of what I'm trying to say right now is that path of life starts early. Fairy tales in their unexpunged form, and, as original as they can possibly be told, were written for everybody in the family, in the community, in the town, in all their blood, guts, and glory. And, as we know that fairy tales get rewritten with the quote-unquote violence removed. But the thing is, if you look at the death card in the tarot, it symbolizes a transition or a transformation, a number of other things too, but what I'm trying to say is the theme of death for young children is received, well, for lack of a better term coming to my mind, electromagnetically as transformation and transition. And death play is part of the play, free play, imaginative play, for young children, and it is natural, and they like that concept. They are connected to the transitive properties of that, the transformative properties of the concept of death rather than actual dying. And death is one of the biggest transitions that we go through as human beings. So the whole point of that story is that fairy tales good for people, and we are continuing to enforce and affirm that they have encoded in them teachings of life, universal principles, natural laws, so on and so forth, all the good stuff that we want to teach to the kids. But how do we teach it? We don't. We live it. We read fairy tales. If you really want to have something direct as a resource, we read fairy tales to the whole family. And as grown-ups, we understand the symbolism within, which is part of living under natural law, understanding that everything is connected and that there's other stuff going on behind these symbols, behind the things we see and the archetypal things that are acted out in our lives. And just a reminder here that you can find a link to anything I read or refer to during the show in the description of the episode. And you can check out my website, thesecretkindergarten.com, with the family focus there for the kids. Through my experience of being a kid myself, which is very important, looking back and feeling sorry for myself for many years. And then getting into teaching, guys, while I was on my awakening journey. Early childhood teaching, 5 years. Gave it everything I had, 120%. I learnt most of the stuff that was corroborated through my study of Rudolf Steiner's teachings, post hoc, if that's the right word to use. So yep, I don't have kids, but guess what? I know what I'm talking about when it comes to child development And of course, on all my channels, there's YouTube, otherworldconnections.substack.com, and Odyssey, Rumble, and I don't know. Don't know what happened to BitChute. Okay, so let's figure out what we are to do. What is better to do, how to heal, how to change, how to achieve goals, and live successful lives of service by making those otherworld connections. Because when you serve others, the fairies and the angels love that. And they come along and they want to see what's happening in that dynamic. And they want to help you. And they want to reward you. And that's what makes this show controversial, because I get pagans saying, I disagree with everything you say. And I get Christians saying, I disagree with everything you say because I mention angels and fairies. One is kind of quote-unquote pagan, and one is kind of quote-unquote Christian. Nevertheless, it's all legit and it's all out there. So anyway, I'm talking way too much. Bernard Rogers' 2013 book, The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose. Chapter 2, The Initiation. Okay, all right, here we go. In the etymological and true sense of the word, initiation means to put... Oh, and by the way, I read like I'm reading to kids. I try not to, but I can't help it, so... Don't take it the wrong way, because I've read 1 billion books to kids. And that's just how I roll. Okay, initiation means to put on a path, to introduce someone into a way. It involves a dynamic projection starting from an initially static position. The origin of initiation is one with that of the existence of humanity, as it is with the birth of each of its representatives. With respect to these latter, the first initiator is the mother when she expels the fetus that forms part of her body and projects the child into the world, where it will grow and become an individual. And I just checked the chat. Hello, Sarah Cross. Hello, Sarah. Nice of you to say hello. Thank you. I will just reply because having manners is important. There we go. And where was I? It's very important to be polite and to have manners, because then you know where you stand with people. And it's actually an occult Eastern philosophy and principle that was in the martial arts world until China kicked everybody out, all the martial artists out, and then they had to go to Hong Kong if they made it there, if they survived. And that's a true story. So free speech and all that, and I know they say freedom isn't free and all that, but hey, it's important to be polite and nice at the beginning to people. So if people say hello, you should say hello back. And then that's how you create good things. And also, if you're really nice to people, then you know where you stand with them. But anyway, that's an aside. I was just thinking about that yesterday. So, so initiation, childbirth, right? With respect to humanity, myths on the one hand and the scientific hypotheses concerning the emergence of the human race on the other offer their own versions. Now, this is translated from French, guys, so it's a bit of a mouthful. In the Western world, the most widespread myths concern the original fall among monotheists, whereas the polytheism of antiquity evoked the interventions of Prometheus and Pandora in man's fate. When one refers to the contemporary evolutionary model, it seems that the humanization of certain creatures of the animal kingdom was not unconnected with the acquisition of the mastery of fire by these creatures, coinciding with a selection from within his kingdom. Was it through his initiation to the art of fire that man was able to extract himself from the womb of nature? The first man of the religions of the Bible would have allegedly lived in blessed ignorance if it were not for the intervention of the woman, who, inspired by the adversary, made him eat the forbidden fruit. Behold, the man has become like one of us, by knowledge of good and evil, the Creator then said. Now he must not stretch forth his hand to take also from the tree of life, so that he might eat its fruit and live forever. And Yahweh drove him from Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken, and posted at the garden's gate in order to forbid entrance, the cherubim and the flame of the turning sword. On the other hand, the story of Prometheus, to which that of Pandora gave the finishing touch, tells how the fire guarded so jealously by the King of Heaven was stolen for mankind by the one who had created them with his own hands. Pandora, whose name can be translated as the gift of all, and as she who gives all, was the creation of Hephaestus, who crafted her from clay. She was sent by the gods to humanity, which was then living in the tranquil bliss of the golden age. She gifted them with trials and tribulations that spread over the entire world once her mysterious box had been opened. In its depths, still hidden, was the invisible light of discreet hope. Here the myths are eloquent. At humanity's origin, meaning at the starting point of the initiation of individuals summoned to leave the state in which nature had set them to. I told you this is translated from French. It's like oh my gosh. Excuse me. Okay, let's just read that one again. Here the myths are eloquent. At humanity's origin, meaning at the starting point of the initiation of individuals summoned to leave the state in which nature had set them to take the path of becoming human beings, we find in direct relationship with the process of separation, whose principal agent is fire in all its demonstrative forms. The transgression of a law. This transgression, according to the Bible, is responsible for the fall into matter. In pagan myth, it brought about the end of the golden age. There we go, the Bible and pagan myth. All right, so, this really is a bit like fairy tales are, are good because reasons. Fairy tales are legit because reasons, and from antiquity because of these reasons, right? It's like a mandala. It's like stories about initiation, because initiation is what life is about, a series of initiations. And, the main initiation is childbirth, and then that all corresponds to the initiation of man being able to initiate. Oh, it's true. And then when you explain it, you just end up, I guess, sounding like this book. Here we find man sent off on the path of mental development. He must start to work from the ground which he had been taken. This is a necessarily ambiguous path, as it is based on, to use the expression from the sacred text, the knowledge of good and evil. We know today how it gave man, among other powers, the ability to destroy the fruit of billions of years of evolution in an instant, or if he chooses to transform life on the planet into a waking nightmare. Sarah Cross in the chat says, I agree about manners. It's a good habit to have. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for being cool and having an awesome show here on Revolution Radio. Check out her show Wednesdays, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Studio A. All right. Back to the book. Yet, there is good reason why the contemporary scientist Carl Sagan defined humans as star stuff, and why an anonymous philosopher who 2 centuries ago dedicated his work to virgin, unsoiled nature thought to describe himself as a mote of dust from paradise. Each of these individuals acknowledged in his own way the luminous origins of human nature. Upon his arrival on the moon, where Cyrano de Bergerac fell by good fortune, he says that without a certain secret he would have been killed 1,000 times over. By the tree of life, growing at the center of the Garden of Eden, he tells the story of his encounter in a forest of myrtle and jasmines with the prophet Elijah, who entrusts him with his secret about the tree of knowledge. Its fruit is covered with a skin that produces ignorance in whoever eats it, and it is beneath this skin that the spiritual virtues of this fruit of knowledge are contained. After God expelled Adam from his blessed place, he rubbed his gums with this skin so that he could not find his way back. In the biblical narrative, man is sent away from Eden to cultivate the earth from which he had been made, but to cultivate the dust of paradise, mentioned by the erudite inhabitant of the north. It is first necessary to eat beneath its thick skin the subtle pulp inside the fruit of the tree of knowledge to find the way back to the tree of life and cross through the curtain of fire. This is the true object of initiatory work. And the crossing through the curtain of fire, in terms of reading fairy tales, or say, to use Varg Vikernes, it's Varg Vikernes, his analogy of, say, reading fairy tales to kids, let's say Santa Claus, leaving the cookies and milk out for the kids, and that Santa's coming and all that sort of thing. Well, that the curtain of fire is finding out that Santa Claus ain't true, in the sense that there's not that actual humanoid guy actually going down the chimney and dropping off the presents. But, having said that, the archetype of Santa Claus, the symbolism of Santa Claus, and that whole thing around Christmas is very much sanctified. It is, in that sense, Santa is very real. But what I'm saying is that curtain of fire, the initiation, is, knowing that, when you grow up, passing through and finding that, knowing that Santa isn't real. A very light initiation. And it's important to promote fantasies for children. That's very important. These kind of initiations are very, very good. All right, common language uses the term initiation in a wide variety of circumstances. A person can be initiated into the art of handling arms or the secrets of the stock market. An individual can initiate himself into the rudiments of a trade or art, But this term will only be used here in its traditional sense, which involves departing on an ascending path toward an inner light. Yet his first steps on this path will plunge the initiate into the darkness of a mystery. Its direction is indicated by the extremely orthodox etymology of the word, formed from the Latin in or on, and iter, which is path. Inere can be translated as to penetrate, and as to begin. Initiate literally means to set off on the path that leads within. Pretty cool. Initiation is a perilous journey by boat toward a sacred center. The crossing of an ocean where the navigator quickly loses the trace of any signs of land. To protect his vessel, the course must be maintained by an expert pilot coming from the depth of ages through what is customarily called an initiatory tradition, in the specific sense of transmission of a spiritual influence. To use René Guénon's term, transmitted from person to person, generation to generation, this spiritual influence is not of human origin because it belongs to the domain of universal light out of which humans were created. Initiation is not directed at the intellect. It is not communicable in the way a technique, knowledge, or science is taught. Closer to art because it, too, requires inspiration. Initiation is the upheaval of the personality triggered by painful moral or physical ordeals, which can sometimes leave deep marks in the flesh of the initiate. Once this radical stage of upheaval has been traversed, initiation is the recreation of the individual and his or her greater receptivity towards the interior world and the inner self. So while information is the horizontal communication of knowledge by the exterior path of a mental representation and is directed at the skin, initiation is vertical participation with universal rhythm through the inner path of a ritual and involves the pulp. All right. So on initiation and fairy tales, here we go. The valuable collection that Emmanuel Koskin has assembled under the title Contes Populaires de Lorraine opens with the story of Bear John and begins like this. Once upon a time, there was a man and wife who were woodcutters. One day, when the wife was bringing soup to her husband, she was caught on a branch in the middle of the woods. While she was struggling to free herself, a bear grabbed her and carried her off to his lair. Sometime later, the woman, who was pregnant, gave birth to a son who was half bear and half human. He was named Bear John. Endowed with superhuman strength, Bear John, when he was 7 years old, removed the boulder that sealed the entrance to the cave, where he and his mother had been imprisoned, and both returned to the woodcutter's house. Increasingly unruly and dangerous, the child was sent to apprentice to the 3 successive smithies. After performing deplorable work, he learned the trade in which he eventually became quite skilled. He then decided to set off in search of adventure, but not before he forged for himself a walking stick to fit his enormous size. He used his last employer's entire stock of metal, a 1/4 ton of iron. The story of Bear John is often considered to be one of the oldest that people have passed it down. And not without good reason. Its introduction, in Koskeen's version, immediately draws attention to elements worth emphasizing because they evoke the time of beginnings. The first two characters we meet are a woodcutter's wife and a bear. The scene takes place in the woods, a wild, natural place in which any trace of civilization is absent. One of those places that in the Middle Ages were called deserts. The woodcutter's wife is trapped there, snagged by a branch. In other words, she is entirely dependent on nature in its primordial state. The bear has just rescued her in order to carry her off to his cave, where he makes her his mate. The woodcutter's wife is a woods woman or wild woman from the family of wild men, green men and woodsmen, who were depicted in the Middle Ages as covered with hair and clad in leaves. This is a close relative to our probable tree-dwelling ancestors, whose instincts even today are probably responsible for the pleasure children feel when climbing trees, where they can dream for hours while sitting in the hollow formed by its branches. A secret world that adults have totally forgotten. The word bear alone summons multiple resonances. In many northern regions in both the Old and New Worlds, In many northern regions in both the Old and New Worlds, the bear was regarded as man's ancestor. Depending on the time and place, the bear was a former man, a remote ancestor, or the brother of the tribal ancestor, or the direct ancestor, the father of all humans. It could also be considered the maternal or paternal uncle, grandfather, grandmother, or father. I sense talking about the ancient bear cult coming on, which we have talked about on Otherworld Connections in previous editions. It was also a culture hero that gave human beings fires and various tools and taught people how to use them. Painted on the lower half of the leather surface of the shamanic tabor, beneath the line representing the underground world, it is a psychopomp, like the Greek Hermes Chthonios. As the two constellations of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the bear indicates the axis in the night sky around which the universe revolves. In the boreal hemisphere, these constellations dominate the Arctic region, whose name derives from the Greek word for bear, Arctos, until the invention of the compass. Sailors used the pole star in Ursa Minor as their guide. The two bears are also the large and small chariots. The Saxons considered the large chariot as the vehicle of the mythical King Arthur, and Japanese tradition even today considers it as that of the emperor. The bear of the story does not simply free the woman from the branches holding her captive in order to bring her to his lair, and no one is capable of sounding the depths of the den of the bear, the abyss in which the pole resides. By all evidence, the bear, as a culture hero, is an initiator and world axis. The bear is the vertical path that travels through the visible surface to soar upward and dive downward. into the invisible. It is the ladder up which the individual must climb to cross through the gates of death. Bear John was born in the cavern of the pole, the preeminent candidate for initiation, a brutal and undisciplined child and an individual of low birth who is endowed with incredible strength. He learns the trade of forging iron, in which he becomes highly skilled, and he uses that skill to cast his cane for taking the high roads of adventure of his shining destiny. A man born of an animal, John represents the dawn of the human race, which can be viewed either from the evolutionary perspective or from that of the faith of those who see an angelic spirit that has come down to inhabit the human animal's physical envelope. When studied closely, the two theories are not so contradictory. The beginning of Bear John's tale suggests a fundamental parallelism between the birth of humanity and the axis of the universe and the start of its initiatory progression. Oh, cool. We're looking at initiation in the Western world now. In all nations, under all skies, the reason for the existence of initiation is the same, but the paths it takes can be different for different cultures. If the goal is the same for all, Gwinon writes on this subject, the starting points are infinitely varied and can be compared to the many points on a circumference from which emerge an equal number of radii that meet at a single center and are thereby the image of the very paths in question here. The pragmatic orientation of the nations of the Western world has encouraged paths based on the working and transformation of matter. These are in fact the paths offered even today by Freemasonry and alchemy, which can thus be considered the only two traditional paths whose remnants have managed to survive in our culture, despite the erroneous interpretations that both have often inspired. Freemasonry in its current form, based on the medieval guilds and on the symbolism of builders, assigns itself the purpose of the symbolic construction of Solomon's temple, in whose highly inaccessible center resides a soaring abyss. Alchemy, which is both a practical and a symbolical discipline, similar to a physic-chemical science, but also, and more importantly, an experimental mysticism, to use René Allot's expression, first endeavors to create the salt of wisdom, which could just as easily be described as the salted temple, or the temple of the salt of Ammon. Expressions that make two allusions to a lanternoir justification of the renowned wisdom of Solomon. While their practical progression is made by means of very different vehicles, the symbolism of Freemasonry and that of alchemy are parallel, and the final direction of the first one's trajectory is analogous to that of the second, about which Allot says, "It desires to free spirit through matter by freeing matter through spirit." And we are going to see now, I think, the Freemasonry, Freemasonic and alchemical parallels in the messages encoded through the symbolism in the stories of the fairy tales. And as we have been decoding fairy tales here on Otherworld Connections and on the Secret Kindergarten Grown-Ups edition, that, we can put these things into our own words with our own cultural lens, and thereabouts, get to an analog of the heart of the matter of the story. And on Otherworld Connections, we try to make it how do I say I try to make it? Just a more matter-of-fact life, living your life way, goal setting and this sort of thing, and getting your mind right and looking after yourself, and and healing, that sort of thing. Because, I always assume that if anyone is actually listening to this, they already know a thing or two about a thing or two. And I don't want to talk to people like they're stupid. And if I don't know things, I'm the first to say. Okay. So anyway, the stages. I'm going to have a sip of my tea. Just one moment, please. So I press mute because I don't know. I think it probably sounds disgusting, me sipping on a tea. All right, the stages. In order to be put on the path of Masonic initiation, the postulant must first be recognized as a candidate for initiation. In parallel, on the paths of practical alchemy, the first step consists of identifying the eligible subject in the mineral kingdom. That is to say, the prime matter from which the work can be started. The human subject must feel as if he has been called. Where does this call come from? The one who hears it will recall a day or a single circumstance that aroused desire within for the other world, hidden behind his practical concerns and the objects of his everyday life. Where can the origin of this desire be situated? How is he to recognize the chain of encounters and crossroads, the succession of paths chosen, the web of coincidences, dreams, and words of disconcerting resonance? Everything, in short, that speaks to him of the castle in which beauty lies sleeping. Fairies probably have their part in this. And yes, and that's what I always say. That, yep, angels and fairies are, they're ready and waiting to help with your dreams, coincidences, and these little things. If you are trying, and if you're trying to do good, and so on and so forth. And right. And how is this stuff going to be recognized? Well, we're going to see through the lens of Freemasonry. Let's check this out. Every veritable initiation begins with a descent into the subterranean reaches of consciousness. The visit inside the earth, for which the Masonic sigil vitriol, VITRIOL, is an invitation. It is by chance that the most powerful acid discovered by ancient chemistry was the one it called oil of vitriol. The SO4H2 of the French nobleman and chemist Antoine Laurent de Lavoisier's successors, as if under the effect of a powerful corrosive, the mental construction of the profane would be dissolved during this fall into darkness. This is the phase in which the aspiring Freemasons strip their metals. This takes place in a dark cave where silence and solitude hang heavy. The alchemists, meanwhile, often designate their mysterious prime matter with the name of vitriol. Medieval iconography and alchemical symbolism everywhere have depicted the initial dissolution, the prerequisite for opening the door of the temple, as the battle between a knight and a dragon. The obvious consequence of the dissolution of a structure, whether that of a metal or a mind is the death of all it supported, and the physical result of this produces chaos. It is from chaos that the canonical labour of the alchemist begins, and it is only after the death of his profane ego, at the threshold of Masonic initiation, that the neophyte is introduced into the sacred enclosure and deprived of sight in order to undergo ordeals, the first of which follows a plunge into a world before the beginning of time, in a space of complete disorder and imbalance. However, there is no lack of attentive hands to help support the neophyte. Invisible guides who seem to have loomed up from elsewhere, and without whose assistance he would never escape from the labyrinth. The destruction of the form inside the ground has liberated a seed. Below it plunge its roots, and above it rise the stem of the new plant that spring will cause to emerge into the air, shape with water, and bloom beneath the sun, when it has successfully passed the test of fire to prove itself worthy of receiving the sun's light. This is how the initiate is born on a level of existence that places him on the path of higher consciousness. Operative alchemy has a similar process for the stone during the first work, whose purpose is the creation of primordial mercury or common mercury. There are countless fairy tales bearing signs, clues, and counsels related to the operative phases of the great work, and to the stages of the path of initiation. It is in search of these that the following pages will be devoted, thanks to the examination of stories taken for the most part from the collection of the Grimm brothers and that of Emmanuel Cosquin, as well as Paul Delarue and Marie-Louise Tenetz's Le Conte Populaire Français, the French folktale, or the regional anthologies published by Erasmus Editions in the middle of the last century. Well, there we go. Those are most of the main places to look. All right. Let's have a go. We're kind of just getting to the meat and potatoes here. All right. The stages. An anonymous quote here. Never be alarmed, reader, if sometimes your hunger goes unsatisfied. You will keep your appetite this way, and perhaps get your hand on a meal. We are reading from Bernard Rogers' book, The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales. Right here on Otherworld Connections. Just got asked from Mitzi in the chat. Hey, Mitzi. Bernard, I missed the publisher here, but I've got it written down, but it's The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother to Goose. Bernard Rogers' 2013 book. And it's translated from French. So it's a bit of a mouthful, and books like this I probably have to read more than once. But anyway, the candidate for initiation, or the subject of this book. The stories of wonders and marvels generally begin with the introduction of the hero. In the domain of my interpretation, the hero represents the candidate for initiation, as well as the prime matter of the great work, which we have uncovered on other decodings of fairy tales in the past here. And let's go back to this reading. This matter is commonly described as scorned by the common folk. The tales often show us boys and girls who have been marginalized by the societies in which they live, or by their own families who have rejected them. They can also be the victim of some kind of handicap or evil spell, or have been born poor or fallen from high estate. Here are a few examples, the number of which should not discourage my readers' charity. And this is also one of the reasons why fairy tales get banned, because people think, well, we don't want to, read stories about, kids that have been really badly mistreated. And this is part of the direct instruction disease that I just invented right now of adults to children, where they think everything they're saying is a direct instruction. And that's not really how the DVD recorder works. They're recording your actions. So if you're reading a story and you know that the story is full of rich symbolism and meaning and lessons in life by way of symbolism, then that's what's going to be embedded into the minds of those listening and spending the time with you. It's a bonding, and it's the right thing to do. And this concept of doing the right thing is really what's being recorded on the young mind. All right. So here are a few examples. The boys. The bad eggs. Bear John was a rough, antisocial boy. Similar in this way to the little one we read just earlier, that Bear John was arguably the first fairy tale, or the oldest. Bear John was a rough, antisocial boy, similar in this way to the little savage of La Canne de Sina Saint-Live. Oh my gosh. Cinq-Cent, excuse me. Excuse me. I don't know this stuff, guys. I learned French for like 2 years in secondary school. The 500-pound cane, who had been found in the woods and was quite wicked, as well as a little rascal named Leopold, who was expelled from school for threatening his teacher with his father's sword. While John was the son of a bear, Leopold owed his birth to a strange circumstance. A good man and his wife had long yearned for a child, but the happy event never materialized. That is not until one day when the man was visiting a neighboring village and ran into an old woman whose uncommon nature he sensed immediately. "Where are you going?" the fairy, brackets old woman, asked him. "I am going to the next village, my good woman." "You would really like children, wouldn't you?" "Oh, yes, my good woman." "Very well. You will see some dogs over there. Try to make them bite you, and you shall have a son." The man caused himself to get bitten, returned home, and told his wife all that had just happened. 9 months later, she gave birth to Leopold. The larger the child grew, the more wicked he became. His parents thought it was because the father had been bitten by a dog. Ill-disposed to keeping such an evil child in his house, the father eventually led him to the end of the road and abandoned him to his adventures. All right, so the abandonment, mistreatment, and curses and all that sort of thing is an original theme in the origins of fairy tales. And as spoken earlier, it's really setting up it's really setting the scene for initiations to happen. And I like how in Otherworld Connections, and I like how in the fairy tales we can decode them to a modern day way of looking at that as a way of just, there are lessons inside the fairy tales symbolically. We can modernize it and look at ways to overcome present day adversities, struggles that we all have in reality. And I think the common struggle that we all have is all of us know that, what's really going on, and that there is this good evil fight, and there are things we have to do. We need to get money, we need to have a job or something, we need to sort of make all these compromises and still hold on to our values. And I think fairy tales we can decode, and we have here on the show, we can decode them in a way that gives us these answers to how to go about our life, and what has really changed me in the past year on this work on fairy tales is to be a bit more human, live a bit more work on being positive, work on my health and work on my fitness. And I know these are all really basic stuff, but if you start going down all these rabbit holes, you can lose sight of these things. So I'm just going to probably pause the book from there. And I just think it's really deep. It's really amazing. And, I think it's worth trawling through these kind of books, such as this one being translated from French. I think we need more than an hour for this in one go, I think. Because it's really starting to warm up. But I think there are a lot of mini initiations we can do in our life, and that are going to help us overall. And I think doing things that aren't really related to the truth movement or alternative media or stuff are going to help us in whatever it is we're looking to achieve from knowing the truth, whatever changes we want to see in the world. For me, I've been making extra effort on DIY, do it yourself. I've been doing a lot of building and finding that every time I pick up a tool, it's an initiation, because I hardly knew what I was doing. Now I know a lot about concreting, I'll tell you that for nothing. Now I'm just starting to learn about woodworking. But anyway, that's about all we got to say for today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Much love, everybody. And we are looking at the Initiatory Path of Fairy Tales next week as well. So stay tuned. Take care, everyone. Much love. Thanks for tuning in. See you at the next one. Bye-bye.